As promised, we welcome all of you back to the show, and we're headed down to Dallas. Nick Kelly from AL.com joins us to talk Crimson Tide, among other things. Nick, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to ask some of the same stuff that you've gotten asked 100 million times in the last 6 months. In your mind, how smooth has this transition been from a legend to Kalen DeBoer?
Frankly, as smooth as it probably can get. I mean, yes, there's going to be some bumps, some issues with transition, but they kept a lot of key staff members in place. Jeff Allen with sports medicine, Ellis Ponder, director of ops, just different people who make the whole thing work and run. Yes, Nick Saban is not there anymore, but they have a lot of the important people who helped Nick Saban do what he did over many years and be successful. So Kalen DeBoer kept a lot of those people. He kept a few assistant coaches. Bob Welton, director of player personnel, still there. So it's really been smooth. And I think you've seen that based on the number of players they kept in post spring in that window. They didn't really lose many guys. And so you keep the roster together. That helps with transition. You also see a lot of recruiting success that they've had. I mean, it really, in terms of winning the offseason, it's gone well. And of course, we'll soon find out how they're going to do on the football field.
So, as we all know, this went bang, bang. Saban says, I'm out. Less than 48 hours later, they've got him. If Kalen DeBoer had said, I don't really want to do the following John Wooden kind of thing, who do you think was next on Alabama's list?
My understanding is Mike Norvell was a top candidate there as well. And I think he could have made a lot of sense if they wanted to go there with him. So I think that's the name I would put in my answer to that. But Steve Sarkisian would have been someone that I think would have been a great fit if they could have gotten him away from Texas somehow. I don't think he was leaving Texas, but I think Mike Norvell was probably a top name on that list that was being considered around that time.
So in that first week after DeBoer's press conference, kind of talk us through some of the landmines he was having to deal with.
Well, he's trying to keep a roster intact, trying to keep players from leaving, and some did, some didn't. I mean, that's the biggest thing when you take over like that is, okay, can you keep your good players? Can you keep players you want to keep? And then it's a matter of getting staff in place, getting people who know the area, who can be helpful, can do what you need them to do, who can help you out and tell you things that you don't know and kind of cover your bases. It was really key getting people who bought into DeBoer's vision, were good for that culture and really fit well with what he wanted to do. And so those are two of the biggest things. It's the people side of it, of getting the right people in place, whether it be players or staff members.
I've tried to imagine if I was in that position where I'm replacing a legend. It was Gene Bartow having to deal with the legacy of John Wooden. Now this guy tries to, somehow make it work with the greatest football coach in college history. Has he sought out Nick Saban a bunch, or has he basically said, look, I'm my own guy, you stay away?
Yeah, I don't know to what extent necessarily they have talked. It's not like we have a call log, like the White House call log or something like that. But I do know that Saban is a willing and available resource for him. They're not in the same building. Nick Saban has an office in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and Kalen DeBoer is at the Malmore Athletic Facility. But he's available. I mean, even just today, they shook hands on the SEC Network set after the show went off air. And so they've talked. And Nick Saban has also been a resource to Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator. They've had a few chats as well. So Nick Saban's around. He's willing, but I think he also wants to give them their space so that they can make the program what they want to make it.
Gosh, this is such a fascinating story. Do you think there is ever a day that Nick Saban wakes up and says, I'm not through with coaching football?
He was asked that this morning of if he misses coaching, and he said he misses the relationships, but I think he doesn't necessarily miss the grind, and I think it was starting to take a toll on him. And he's 72. I mean, frankly, when I'm 72, I don't think I'll be as busy as that man is. And so he's retired from coaching, but I think he's really enjoying broadcasting. He's approaching it like he's a coach. He's watching all this film. He's trying to essentially prepare in a way that he would have if he was coaching. He just doesn't have a team that he's coaching. So, but he's trying to still be thoroughly prepared for anything he's encountering, so he can speak in smart and intelligent ways about anything that comes up on air. So I'd be surprised if he was ever going to coach again. And I think he's quite happy right now doing the broadcasting thing.
So fan base wise, this guy's undefeated, so everybody loves him. If he goes 9-3 and it's iffy and they're on the fence post, how much does that change? How much do they turn on him?
Yeah, the honeymoon might not last long if he starts losing games, and I think there's an understanding that undefeated. I mean, there's the fan base, and there's parts of the fan base that expects undefeated every year. They expect it under Nick Saban. I mean, it's Alabama, so there's high expectations. There's a high standard. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But I think the more realistic fans understand, they've got a tough schedule. The SEC just got tougher with Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, it's not going to be easy to go undefeated, much less go 11-1. I mean, I think it's perfectly acceptable for him to lose a couple games. Now, some fans might not see it that way, but I think it also depends on what games he would lose. If he's losing to Georgia and he loses to Oklahoma on the road, that's one thing. If he lost to South Carolina at home or another team that's not quite maybe seen as that top echelon level of team, that might be a little different story. So I think it just depends on who he loses to. I think 9-3 would be a little jarring just because I think there was one season of 3 losses that Nick Saban had during his time at Alabama. But I think if Kalen DeBoer finishes 10-2, 11-1, fans are going to be pretty happy. And I think the big thing is if he can make the playoff in year one, I think that's the expectation. Of course, some fans would love a national championship. There's no reason they can't. But I think making the college football playoff is a good year one goal. And if he can do that, I think it's going to be seen as a success.
You kind of beat me to the punch. This team a year ago was good enough at the end to beat Georgia, if you want to call it a neutral site in Atlanta. In your mind, is there a legitimate path to a year one national championship?
Oh, there's always a path, but it's going to be really hard to do. You got to win more games than you've ever had to win. I've tried to tell people this. Nick Saban, even if he was still the coach of Alabama, it would be really hard to win national championships. I mean, he hasn't won one since 2020. And that's the biggest, I think, drought he ever had. And of course, he's retired now, so that drought is going to continue, so to speak. But the point being, that was a fairly sizable gap for what he had done previously. But it is so hard to win right now. There's so much more parity in terms of teams having to play some really good games, some really good teams, NIL, the transfer portal. There are just so many factors, and it is tough to win. It can be done, but it's going to be maybe more similar to what basketball is, where you have to have a lot of things go right for you to go win a national championship. Now, basketball, I still think is harder to go win a national championship because for all the games you have to go win in March Madness. But for football, I mean, you're adding these new rounds to the playoff. You have to win. You have to beat some good teams. So it's not going to be easy. But I think there's a path if Alabama plays really well and things fall their way. But it's hard to predict this far out.
Nick, this is my Texas A&M conspiracy theory question.
Uh-oh.
When Washington played Michigan in the national title, do you think Kalen DeBoer knew that he was about to get a phone call from area code 205?
Maybe. I mean, I don't want to speculate because I don't know for sure either way, but certainly possible. I mean, that's the thing. In that business, most businesses, you kind of have to be anticipating what's going to happen. But I think a lot of the college football world didn't know that Nick Saban was going to retire. I think that decision was made pretty soon before Saban called it a career. I mean, he basically went to that meeting that day, and the players did not expect that he was going to say, "I'm retiring." Like, there was no, "Oh, this is just a well-kept secret that's not publicly out there." A lot of people I talked to really thought he was going to keep doing it because he was still working. He was interviewing candidates for openings that day that he decided to retire. So, I mean, he was still working hard. He was still doing things. So to say that Monday of that week that Kalen DeBoer knew there was going to be an opening, I think at some point, yeah, obviously you didn't have to be a clairvoyant to know that the Alabama opening would come open at some point in the near future just because, yeah, Saban's 72 years old. So I don't know if Kalen DeBoer knew it then, but he probably at some point was looking at, hey, Alabama's going to be open at some point in probably the next 5 years. That might be a job he's interested in. And he hired Jimmy Sexton as his agent, which is a good agent to have if you want to get the Alabama job.
Great stuff. I can't thank you enough for doing this. Good luck on the new job.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me, and hope you have a good rest of your week.
We'll go to the break by telling you you're listening to the George Plaster Show on 95.9 FM.